Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Smarter Background Checks, Why AI-Powered Social Media Screening Matters. My name's Clive, and I'm a Product Marketing Manager at HireRight. Our webinar today will be co-presented by Ben Moniz and Martina Dostalova. Ben is CEO and founder of Pharma, the world's largest social media screening company, and Martina, a Senior Product Manager at HireRight. In what promises to be a very insightful session, Ben and Martina will help you understand how AI-powered social media screening can bring greater confidence to your screening program. But before we start, I want to briefly cover a few housekeeping items before I hand over to Ben and Martina. So first off, the legal disclaimer, which basically says HireRight and Pharma prepared this webinar, and accompanying slides for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. The slides contain confidential information directed solely to the intended recipients and may not be further distributed without the express written permission of HireRight. So that's the disclaimer. If you are experiencing any audio or visual issues at the beginning of the session, during the session, the best advice is to refresh your browser or click on the F5 key on your keyboard. So that's F5. If you have any questions, we'd be delighted to answer those. Please enter those in the Q&A section at the foot of your screen that you should see, and we will look to answer all questions at the end of the session. We will be emailing everyone who's on the webinar, who's attending, and indeed those that registered. We'll be emailing a recording of today's webinar, so look out for that coming to you in a couple of days at most. Before I hand over to Ben and Martina, we would really appreciate getting your feedback. This helps us to ensure that we're providing you with the content and webinars that you find insightful and informative. So at the end of the session, there's a very short survey. Please take a minute to complete this. And therefore, without further ado, Ben, it's over to you.
Indeed it is. Thank you, Clive, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody out there in the world. This is a picture of me, and this is me on video. So I am Ben, the founder and CEO of Pharma. We are HireRight's longtime social media screening partner. 10 years ago, I started this company with an idea that the workforce was changing, that we were going to see increasingly more and more Gen Z, millennial folks, as we'll talk about today, who are finding themselves into the workforce and have lived their lives online just as much as offline, and really helping employers bring that dimension of who somebody is in text, image, and video into the talent screening process. So, really the goal for today is to kind of keep, what I would say a somewhat of a high altitude to begin with, but, dipping down into some of the more detail around the product, how it works, how it doesn't work. Today we'll be talking exclusively about HireRight. So again, Pharma is a partner of HireRight, but everything we're going to talk to today with my pal Martina is really going to be through the lens of HireRight and how it's used today. So if you're a HireRight customer or thinking about becoming a HireRight customer, this is the webinar for you. Everything we're about to talk about is all available through HireRight. So again, we'll start very high level, talk a little bit about why social media screening is one of the fastest growing check types in the industry, why more and more companies, particularly in certain sectors, are turning to social media screening in 2025 and beyond, and go from there into the details of the product, how it works, how it doesn't work, why third parties exist, et cetera, like Pharma, in partnership and collaboration with HireRight. So that's really what we're going to talk to today, sort of the industry, where we are at a 30,000 foot level, going down right down to ground level into the product details, how it functions, how it works, and hopefully leaving some time for questions at the end. My goal today is to ensure that you leave this session with a greater and deeper understanding about why social media screening is increasingly becoming more and more important in the world of talent screening, how it works, what it doesn't do, what it does do, expel some myths along the way, and really put you in a position so looking back on this webinar, it's an hour well spent. You can get on with your day with some new knowledge about the changes in the global screening industry. So with that, let's talk about how background screening packages are evolving. So I mentioned this, at the sort of top of my intro here, this idea that, the workforce is changing. And I think, again, when we think about background screening and why new package elements present themselves, or why new check types, whether it's social media, ID, right to work, depending upon where you are, different checks have emerged, not because background screening firms want to, sell you more stuff. Of course, of course that's part of it, right? Of course they do. But why are background screening firms evolving the package mix, the tools and components within the packages that you're purchasing today? Well, from my perspective, it largely comes down to how clients are demanding and sort of looking at ways of saying, we want to answer the same questions we have for a long time. What is the risk this person's going to present to my organization? Is there anything I need to know about from a culture perspective, a safety perspective, maybe even a risk and a brand perspective, within my organization? But how do I use the online record to answer that question? And that's coming up because employers have now recognized that their workforce is changing. This is a great stat. Just last year, for the very first time, Gen Z and millennial made up 50% of the workforce in the United States. And if you extrapolate that to the global population and you include what's Generation Alpha, so anyone born since 2010, hard to believe, but this is the first summer that folks who are 14, 15 years old are now beginning to get summer internships, find their way into the workforce. So we're at the very beginning of Generation Alpha right now. And so now 70% of the world's population is either Gen Z, millennial, or Generation Alpha. These are people that are all digital natives who've spent, as a millennial myself, I can tell you, just as much time online as offline over the course of their career as they've developed as professionals in the world. That number, just Gen Z and millennial in the workplace in the United States, is going to climb to 70% in 4 years from now. So we find ourselves in a position where employers, and by extension, I would say HR teams, talent acquisition teams, employee relation teams, are asking themselves, how have these demographic changes in the workplace forced me to evolve and rethink how I approach my screening practice and my screening process? So again, all these new tools and check types, they're not here because, again, just background screening companies want to sell you more stuff. It's a reaction to employers saying, as our workforce evolves, the old methods of screening that might have made sense in the late 90s or early 2000s may no longer apply in 2025. So that's a piece I'll start you with here, is that we're starting to see changes. And I would argue with identity, it's a similar sort of story where you have more and more remote employees who are connecting digitally, maybe never meeting an employer for the first, until they're a year into, their employment from an in-person perspective. Same story. People want to make sure that your employers want to make sure that the candidates are who they say they are. That's why you see ID coming in, because it changes in the workforce, changes in the tools, changes technologies that are used, changes in, again, how we all work and how we collaborate. So a lot of this evolution you're seeing right now, I believe, is a function of changes, these demographic changes in the workplace, that we're seeing. And, don't just take my word for it. You can look at these, wide range of headlines here, right? I think we've all, sort of seen, this in maybe in our own way. If you look at the Google trends of social media fired, the headlines are out there, and not just are people getting fired, but we're seeing more and more case law in the United States, in the Ninth Circuit here, which is that bottom left National Law Review. Employers are now held responsible for what's happening between employees, more on that later, but employers being held responsible for what's happening between employees on online channels. You look at the FCA in the UK that's now beginning to say, okay, well, non-financial misconduct, including misconduct that happens between employees in the financial services industry online, is now something that banks and financial services firms have to be held responsible towards. So it's not only that we're seeing the headlines of people getting fired because of what's online, but we're starting to see changes as well in the sort of what I'll call regulatory landscape that are driving, some compression and evolution, further evolution, I would say, in some of that like package check types that are being included in more and more background checks in 2025. And that's where, we look at the survey data and it backs it up, right? We're seeing more and more that employers are either through survey, through our own analyses, or maybe even just something you're seeing in your own company, are choosing not to hire people because of what they find online, right? And this idea and this concept, again, is partially coming to bear because we've had this major inflection point where we have so much of our workforce that is now digital natives. And again, employers for a long time have asked themselves these questions: how's this person going to act when they join around fellow employees? How are they going to act around customers, right? If somebody said something racist in a job interview, if somebody showed up high to work, on their very first day, right? These are all things that, again, employers have cared about for a long period of time, but again, are evolving the way they get at the answer to these questions based on the changes in the workplace, right? And so it's not just that employers are reacting to what they're seeing in their own workforce. We're also seeing, this sort of second layer here of the compliance landscape evolving along with it. Right now, depending upon where you are in the world, and this may not apply to you if you're not in the United States, but I think one thing we have seen around this type of legislation and litigation is that employers are increasingly finding themselves under new and different and evolving forms of guidance from the regulators that they work with, right? This is most especially pronounced, I would say, in the financial services, I'll say healthcare, critical infrastructure, think oil, gas, energy, that kind of thing, and certainly would lump, in healthcare, biosciences and life sciences as well. But employers are now increasingly not just seeing changes in their workforce that are driving evolution in their background screening packages, but also beginning to, face regulatory compression and the regulatory environment that's actually now working, in a way that's requiring them to start checking for these sorts of things. So, this post is a good example, but just, last year in July of 2024, the Ninth Circuit, a very influential court in the United States, decided that employers, based on an employee who was harassed online and, had been treated away by coworkers on the internet, that, they were saying, I believe, racist things about that individual, and again, made them contribute to a toxic and unsafe work environment. Employers are now held liable because of these changes, because of these challenges, right? And so where does that leave us, right? Like so many of you, I'm sure, before I started this company, I had heard, like, don't look at people's social media when you hire them. Don't look at who they are on Google. You're going to see stuff you shouldn't see, right? So employers now find themselves where they're caught, if you will, between a rock and a hard place where, they are seeing, again, the changes in their workplace. If you're in the United States, you're seeing this Ninth Circuit ruling. If you're in financial services in the UK, you might be seeing the, FCA putting some guidance along non-financial misconduct. By extension, you might be in education in the UK and seeing the Keeping Children Safe in Education Act, which is now requiring that employers and educational institutions begin doing social media screening and additional vetting for those that are going to be working with children, for all the obvious reasons, and all the parents in the room, I'm sure, can appreciate it, right? But where does that put employers? We're seeing changes in the workplace. We're getting the regulators coming to us and saying, hey, you got to start checking these sorts of sources. You got to start being held liable for any misconduct that happens on these channels. But I've always heard that I can't do this myself, right? I've always heard that if I look at a person's social media and I go online and I see that, this person is pregnant or they're disabled or, maybe a certain religious affiliation, that I can't unsee that information, right? And this, fake Facebook profile here is a good example that we like to sort of illustrate, just to stress the tension that so many of you are likely feeling when it comes to, again, these demographic changes, the regulatory pressure, but then your legal counsel or your, folks in employment relations who are saying to you, no, talent acquisition, shared services, employee relations, don't do this type of screening because you're going to see stuff you shouldn't see, right? Doing it yourself, again, the slide says it all, is time intensive and inconsistent, but it also exposes you to legal risk. And I'll, just show you here, if you look at the profile picture, you see a person's ethnicity, you see that they served in the military. See, they went to a Catholic school and they like books like What to Expect When You're Expecting and Baby Names. So where does that leave employers, right? It puts them in a position where, again, they're seeing these demographic changes, the regulation changes, but then doing it themselves, they're not allowed to do it, right? And that's really, why HireRight and FAMA have come together, to kind of launch this partnership back in, 2019, and now 6 years in, seeing it become one of the fastest growing and emerging check types for all of HireRight customers. So that's really why companies like ours exist, to blind you to, and I won't steal too much of the HireRight thunder here, but to blind you to protected classes, to focus on maximum possible accuracy in reporting, to only show you information that gives you that sort of what I'll call, perspective into whether or not somebody acted in a way that's directly contrary to your business interest or your legitimate interest as an employer to understand this information. So we're not scoring, we're not giving you a thumbs up or a thumbs down, we're not telling you who's a good person, who's a bad person, but instead what we're doing is, to use a baseball analogy, calling balls and strikes. You determine the strike zone. You're the one who gets to decide, these are the things that we should care about, these are the things that we shouldn't care about, and we want to be able to see this and only this information via social media check, should it exist in a person's online presence. And why? Because the stuff is expensive. We're not doing this for the sake of just wanting to have an additional check type and spend more money on screening. The idea here is very much focused on, how do we limit these sorts of costs? How do we take that $56 billion that employers use due to workplace violence, the 2.6 to sexual misconduct, and begin unraveling that and putting ourselves in a position where you can bring this dimension of who somebody is in text, image, and video compliantly into your talent screening process without sacrificing any of the other things that we talked about related to compliance, turnaround time, and scale. So with that, I think Martina was having some technical issues. So, Clive, did you want to play Martina for this? You want me to run through it? How would you like to run it?
Yeah, I'll do it, Ben. As you can probably see, not half as glamorous as Martina, if you could have seen her. But I will. Yes, I will take this forward. Thanks so much, Ben. Okay, so thank you for setting that context, and really then just driving into our social media service and what that delivers and how it works, reflecting some of the comments that Ben made earlier. So our social media search product is essentially Pharma's AI-based software solution that we have integrated into the HireRight screening environment. So what that means is it looks very consistent with all your other background screening services, and is as seamless as any other services you may order from HireRight. AI-based in that, if you think about it, what the service has got to do is very quickly and intelligently identify from masses of online content and information that exists in our digital world, and identify information that you've predefined that's relevant for employees and new hires at your organization, to pull that out and report back to you. So using AI, but also combined with human review to make sure it's providing you with the information and results that you have requested for candidates being screened through our social media search product. What it does helps identify problematic behaviors amongst potential and current employees. And really importantly, it's only searching publicly available social media profiles. And so not private content from candidates, and making sure that, it's just generally not too intrusive, but also abides by privacy regulations around the world, in the US, the UK, and yes, the rest of the world. And it looks at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I think actually one question we've already had for how long back, only limited to 7 years. So very defined sort of search criteria will identify problematic behaviors that you've defined, and we'll come on to that through these social media accounts. And we use information, identifying information, names, email, date of birth, phone number, address history if we have it, and education and employment history, address history too, again, if we have it. So using strong identifiable identifiers to make sure that when we find a social media account, that it does indeed relate to your candidate. Okay, so a little bit about the search flow. So really importantly, this service is not just going around and identifying any behavior that at all. It's only identifying misconduct that you as an employer have defined previously with HireRight, and I'll talk a little bit about the choices, the options you have about defining that's relevant to the jobs that you're screening for, that's relevant to what you care about in your work culture, Yeah. So it's defined by the attributes that you select. It's fully integrated into HireRight Screening Manager, so a consistent, seamless experience. And just again, as we say, only content meeting your defined search criteria will appear. Social media search combination of AI and people means you only receive reports that contain relevant employer relevant information. Okay, so if we go on to, whoops, let me take you to the next slide. So you build the social media screening solution working with HireRight. We have 8 categories that you can choose from. Key categories: crime, intolerance, trolling, violence, and 4 other. Sorry, let's go to the next one. Threats, cannabis, sex, and other drugs. And if we just go back, so what we do flag for crime: apparent involvement in or support of crimes, including terrorism, theft, gang affiliations. What we don't: crimes not appearing to involve the candidate, and cannabis consumption. Intolerance: words and images expressing prejudice based on race, gender, sexual orientation, national origin, religion, and more, including the use of bigoted symbols and images. And what we don't: mainstream political beliefs or civil political discourse. Trolling: online harassment, essentially, that's about bullying, ostracizing, but we won't flag content addressing a broader audience or inanimate objects, e.g. this table is ugly. So you can see that hopefully from this that you define the behaviors, the misconducts that, as I said, you think is relevant and important to identify, and then even that it's contained again to make sure that it is misconduct and not just comments that really don't substantiate that. And then violence: words and images endorsing gun violence, excessive gore, or intentions to commit violent acts. What we don't flag: articles about violence not involving the candidate, movie scenes, or gun control advocacy. And then another of the 4 options: participating in destructive activities, hostile actions and aggression towards others, desire to hurt themselves or others, support of threatening or hostile acts. We don't flag other people's violence or aggressive acts, or indeed mixed martial arts, which is a perfectly sensible pastime for many people. Cannabis: what we flag: use, growth, or sale of cannabis and CBD products, as well as images of cannabis in any form. But what we don't: cigarettes, cigars, and e-cigarettes. Sex: what we flag: sexual innuendos, nude photos, explicit or suggestive imagery, adult sex dolls, and pornographic content. But what we don't: swimwear, underwear, nude statues. And then drugs: what we flag: references to or consumption of illicit drugs and use of drugs outside of their intended purpose. What we don't: cannabis, cigarettes, cigars, and advocating for detox or rehabilitation. So as you can see, a number of range of categories, and that you work with HireRight to decide of those categories, which ones do you want our social media search to identify those behaviors, or some of them, that's defined really by what's important to you as an organization. Other things to note: as I've said, I think earlier, that it's publicly available content only. So public posts, shares, likes, those sorts of things will be picked up, but private social media communication from one person to another will not be picked up. Content will be explicit, may be explicit, as nothing is censored, and the product should be reviewed holistically with the rest of the background report. And here are some examples, made up examples, but nonetheless sort of illustrate the type of content we could identify through the social media search product. So, as you can see, some related to threat or violence from Facebook. Again, as I say, examples, some around alcohol, and then one around trolling. And whilst we have blanked out potential swear words from these dummy examples, the actual results that you will see in a report will not be censored. And then finally, the report format, just showing that what we will return to you once we've done a social media search conducted on a candidate, you will see which social media site it came from, what category it's within. So in this example, violence, what the format is, and then basically some of the detail behind that post that we found. And this example, we're showing that we saw two pieces of content from Facebook and Twitter. And that's it. So over to questions. Right. So Ben, with Pharma's software solution being AI-based, does this present challenges, barriers in states that have legislation around the use of AI in the screening process?
Yeah, great question there. And you guys can all hear me okay, right? I think.
Yep.
Okay, great. I think it's a bit of a tape delay here. So thanks, Terry. So the general idea here is that, this is not a automated employment decision-making tool, right? This is not something that, we're telling you who's good or who's bad. As you saw in some of the examples here, and I'll just kind of click back through them as we go through, some of these slides. What you have an opportunity to do as a user, and it looks like, we have folks asking to go over slides 14 and 15 again, which is a great point. Generally you get to decide what you want to flag for, right? And so a lot of the AI decision-making tools that are out there, a lot of the AI legislation that's out there around hiring is that you're trusting a system to make a decision for you, right? That's the sort of big issue at heart here. The central theme of, whether it's the ongoing lawsuit that's publicly available, that public knowledge around Workday, all that sort of stuff is guided around this idea that there are AI tools that are out there that are making decisions for HR teams about who gets hired and who doesn't. And those decisions are unexplainable. What this is really doing is putting you in a position where you, as an end user, get to use your own human cognition, your own pattern recognition, your own expertise, and your own understanding, if you will, of what risk looks like for your organization. So when you see threats, cannabis, sex, other drugs, I'll go back to slide 13 here as well, crime, intolerance, trolling bots, these are things you can turn on or off, right? You might say, you know what, we don't really care about online trolling. If somebody is harassing people on the internet and, we're not a tech company, we're not digital, we don't care as much about folks that are harassing people online, insulting people. We have kind of a fun-loving, insulting culture. I'm just making stuff up at the time. But, the idea here is that you don't have to flag for everything. You can turn these things on or off. So really what you're doing is using your own judgment, using your own employee handbook, your own understanding of what good looks like to determine what gets flagged and what doesn't. We use the same information out of HireRight that they use to run your standard criminal checks today, or the other types of checks that you have in the package that you're purchasing. That same personal data, person's name, emails, you saw their alias, location, employer information, education information, if HireRight is collecting it, we use that to go out and find that person's web presence. Then we filter through it against these parameters, only escalating for your review any publicly available content that falls into one of those categories. Otherwise, we're just going to automatically clear that content through. So the direct answer to the question is no, there isn't as much to consider around like the New York AI Act, some of what's happening here in California where I'm based right now, but these general ideas and these general concepts that, we have to pay attention to tools that are making decisions for us. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a way to use AI to accelerate the locating and identifying of a person's web presence. As you guys saw, we're doing the hard, heavy lifting when it comes to, finding the person online, right? We're using artificial intelligence there, what typically would be Boolean search strings and a human investigator going out and finding likely social media presence or profiles about a person, using automation for that, right? Instead of deciding what's racist and what's violent, what's threatening, what's harassing, these task types here, we're using AI to read text, image, and video, just like a person can, to label content accordingly here. So again, the automation is being used, the AI is being used more to accelerate what have historically been manual and time-intensive data collection tasks. The artificial intelligence around, whether a person is a good fit or not, whether they're good, whether they're bad, is entirely your discretion, your decision, and a human decision. So we spent a lot of time, working with our employment lawyers. HireRight from the very beginning, as you all know, one of their big differentiators in the market is global compliance, and we fit squarely within their global approach to compliance with some folks, leadership from, legal leaders they have like Chris Lemons and others there, on the team. Probably a longer answer than you were expecting, but what else was, I think, do we need to advise applicants of the AI use? And Doreen, I'm just sort of reading some of your questions here that you're forwarding from the team. I'm not in the group chat, so feel free to drop those in as we keep it going here. But this is one of these things where it is a consent-oriented solution. So just like other background check types, if you're collecting consent for other background checks, we do recommend you collecting consent. The AI use case, I'd encourage you to consult with your counsel from our perspective. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. I'm just the CEO of a company, but our customers today, we haven't seen anyone asking us or being directed to advise applicants of AI use, but that might be something that, you want to revisit and figure out with your, counsel there internally.
Cool. So one question, what platforms do you check? Is it only Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram? No, indeed, there's also Indeed, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest as well, I believe.
Yeah, it's depending upon the configuration. HireRight has a couple of different options, but you can go into Instagram Reels video, TikTok video, but think of, the sources here as all publicly available social media about a subject. That's what, we're covering here. Again, it's nothing that's private, but entirely publicly available information from those sources. But we can get a full source list over to whoever answered that or asked that question. We can get that over to you from the HireRight product team.
Indeed. Does the service support screening for global candidates? Absolutely. There's no restrictions on where this can be conducted. So yes, big yes to that one. How do you ensure compliance? Sorry, Ben.
Go ahead. No, go for it.
Actually, good question for you. How do you ensure compliance with privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA when analyzing public content?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the headline is effectively two and threefold, but all the consumer privacy laws, whether it's the FCRA, the GDPR, CCPA, rely on a few consistent frameworks of how this information is adjudicated. One is maximum possible accuracy. Is this the John Doe that we think it is? Is this the person that I intend to be screening? Is this their profiles? And has the vendor taken upon themselves to pursue maximum possible accuracy in reporting? So, general idea here is that one, we are matching on 3 identifiers, a potential social media profile to a subject. We're using 3 identifiers provided to us to match against, or any identifiers we discover through the process, such as if we find a LinkedIn profile on the subject, we can use the additional identifiers from that profile to match against prospective identifiers on the other profiles that we're filtering through. The second is job relevancy. You call it legitimate interest in the UK, whether it's or across Western Europe under the GDPR. You can think business interest in the FCRA and CCPA, but general idea here goes back to what we're looking at, which are these flags, right? Being able to determine as an end user the permissible purpose under the FCRA, the legitimate interest, the business purpose I have. I'm going between different legislative frameworks right now, but all of them are the same idea. Do you have a real purpose for using this information, or was it collected accidentally? Was it something that was collected not because of a business purpose, but something that you're seeing that you shouldn't see? In other words, bouncing around between these slides here. No one likes doing that. It makes me dizzy too. But general idea here is that if you see this information when you do it yourself, you are exposing yourself to information for which you do not have a business interest or a legitimate interest to view. It's totally irrelevant that someone likes what to expect when you're expecting, unless I can't even make up a glib joke about why you would want to know if somebody is reading, a book or not about what to expect when you're expecting, right? And so that's when the regulators come in, as they start to say, hey, you're seeing stuff that you shouldn't see. But when you turn on different flag types here and you select, and then I'm bouncing around a lot between the different things that you want to screen for, you are determining the basis for legitimate interest here. And I think I saw a great question. Someone said, can the drug option be able to be removed for states where marijuana is legal? Not only can the drug option be removed, but that is why, great question asker, who I swear was not planted, you can turn cannabis off but leave other drugs on. We used to, before cannabis had sort of found its place of being, more recreationally legal in different, global jurisdictions, certainly here in the States, but abroad as well, when it began to get decriminalized, when generally marijuana testing started getting pulled from drug panels, people still care about things like fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, other sorts of Schedule I drugs. So we actually split our drug flag into cannabis and other drugs about 4 or 5 years ago. So again, FAMA, HireRight as a provider, we are keeping track with changes in legislation, changes in what customers are deeming permissible or legitimate to view as part of their process, and maintaining and updating these flags so you can just kind of have, a pick list here. So that's really, when it comes down to making employment decisions, you can use this for new hires, for existing employees. And I'd also offer up a third rail where it's not just, do we want this person to work with us or not, but you could simply say with some of this, let's say we have an all-star candidate, but they started trolling people online. Or let's say we have an engineer that we really like, but we see references to other drugs on their profile. They made a joke about using cocaine or something like that, right? You could say to that person, hey, I know that was a joke, but that stuff in our company doesn't fly. This is not the sort of behavior we're seeing. Can you please delete that post and make sure that you don't evidence this behavior with others, right, when you join? So this can be just as much a reason not to hire someone. And again, legitimately talk to your lawyers about it, talk to your HireRight account manager. Every single day, employers are making decisions based on social media information in ways that they haven't in the past. We have seen 200% growth across our entire client base over the past 12 months. So more and more employers every single day are turning to both new hire and employee screening. About a third of our volume right now, a third of the people we're screening are existing employees at companies as well for very extreme behaviors. Think workplace violence, threats, especially what's happening. I'm sure many of you saw, again, the shooting at the NFL workplace just this past weekend. More and more employers are concerned about violence in the workplace. So we'll only turn on talent screening, you might imagine, for existing employees. You're only going to look, perhaps, and this is a great example, at violence and intolerance, perhaps. For new hires, you might turn everything on. But for your existing employees, you might say, you know what, we really just want to know about people acting racist or hateful towards one another or saying things that are violent. So these are the behaviors that you can tag. You can turn them on or off based on the type of person you're hiring, whether it's a new hire or a existing employee. I'm just going to keep reading these questions as they come in. The look back is limited to 7 years. It does work internationally. As Clive said, we operate in 25 countries right now. And it does work effectively for common names. So someone says, does the service still work effectively for common names? That is One of the few things that we do, again, finding that person's web presence, filtering through their content accurately. That is all that we do, doing that at scale, doing it quickly, doing it compliantly. So yes, this works just as well for common names as it does for uncommon names.
Let's go. So this. So isn't most of people's real opinions on their private profiles? Can you answer that, Ben? Because I think that's a really interesting question.
So, when I started Fama years ago, again, funnily enough, 10 years ago Sunday was when we established our EIN, right? So this was a long time ago that we got this company going, and it was a very different, hiring market. I remember when I started the company, people would say to me like, yeah, my kids are on social media. What does it have to do with hiring anybody, right? And so, it's such a different conversation now. And I think, part of it was my initial thinking of that, same question, right? I remember when I first talked to Pam Devada, who some of you may have seen speak at HireRight events in the past, or if you've attended HR Tech or any of our other industry background screening conferences, you might have seen her speak. One of the things she told me, she was like, look, this is a consented product. Everybody who runs this check, you have to get their consent. My first thought was, well, if before I get screened, if I know I've been saying things online that my employer wouldn't like, I'm going to go make, my profiles private, right? And what's really interesting is the psychological sort of framing of some of these behaviors, and why it's so important is that people who publicly normalize acting hateful, acting violent, acting threatening, going back to these flag types here, posting about their open use of illegal drugs, or even in some states, cannabis, right? Sexual references, people that are posting, we see all the time, pornography, believe it or not, and things that are publicly available is, again, that's the normalization of aberrant behavior that we're tracking. That's the whole purpose of this solution, right? So many of us, myself included, we say things privately that we wouldn't say to our employer. I say stuff to my wife that I wouldn't say to my friends, and vice versa, right? And so people, generally they have an idea of what's appropriate for which environment. And what we're sort of tracking and clocking here are the people that think it's okay to act intolerant or hateful in a public fashion towards others, right? Because that is what they bring into the workplace. So interestingly enough, despite, some people might say their true opinions on a private profile versus a public profile, from our perspective, it's much more, well, if you're doing things privately, great, keep it private. Don't bring it to work. Don't act like that in the workplace, right? But if you are publicly acting in ways that are intolerant, threatening, or harassing, your fellow employers are going to clock that. And I think the last piece I'd just offer on this question is like, think about how people in the workplace are engaging today. I remember when I graduated from, university 20 years ago at this point, I remember going to happy hour after work. I remember hanging out at my office, in New York City after, people had gone home, and, playing video games with engineers. I've been in software my whole career, right? Or just getting to know some of the executives and learning about them through the different departments that they're in. But what's interesting now with remote work, and what I'll just say, the connected generation, is that employees are now meeting for the first time on TikTok or LinkedIn. They're following each other on sites like Discord, Reddit, et cetera, right? And so in some cases, they're actually seeing the online identity before they meet the analog identity of their fellow employees, right? And that's where, when we go back to, again, bouncing around and don't make you too dizzy, but when we go back to this piece of legislation here, it entirely exists because the courts have recognized that employees now are engaging together online in ways that they hadn't previously, right? So employers are now having to deal with the fact that it may be the first time they get to know a fellow employee is meeting them online. And if you are publicly acting in ways that's hateful or violent, that's going to be a problem. So probably a long, again, longer answer to your question. Should I just keep reading these questions here? I know I'm seeing questions that are written on the screen, everyone, just so you know. I'm not just like making these up. Is this a one-time thing, or is it always screening once activated? It can be both. You can turn this on as a one-time thing. You can set this up as a cadence. The most frequent screening we see right now is people who screen monthly, and it's not real time. So it's not like, and this was really a product decision that we made. We didn't want monitoring, and this is offered through HireRight, monitoring to be in real time, that as soon as you say something, you get flagged for it, right? That felt, a little just candidly intrusive into a person's identity, right? Maybe they posted something, thought about it the next day, and deleted it, right? And so we've seen that before. So what we think about it is more rescreening on an ongoing basis, where companies will set up a cadence, do a first 7-year look back on the initial check, and then maybe set up monthly monitoring thereafter, which will only screen what has been posted since that initial screen was checked. So that's more recurring screening in the traditional background screening parlance, as opposed to real-time monitoring that you might get through arrest monitoring today through the many service providers that offer that. And by extension, are you seeing employers run checks post-hire? How often? Certain industries, yes. Financial services, professional services, healthcare, and I'd include life sciences and healthcare, so pharmaceutical firms, biotech firms within that, and probably to round it out, critical infrastructure and industry. We have a lot of oil and gas customers, nuclear energy, who use monitoring today. I wouldn't say we see it as much in technology or retail, but we do see it in some of the industries that I mentioned, where I believe if you ask an employer with financial services, healthcare, critical industries firm, do you care more about risk happening right now in your company, or, to use a simple term, like dodging a bullet on a new hire? I think most CEOs in those industries would say risk happening right now because of the high dollar per employee, high revenue per employee, the impact that a single person can have on operations. A little bit different in some of the other industries. All right. What's next for Fama? We'll come back to that. A few more tactical questions here. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go for it, Clive.
Yeah, Ben. Yeah. Do you show any images or just the summary description of the posts?
We show you the content. So you'll see the image, you'll see the summary description, you'll get both. So we'll show you the written text, and if you're on video, we'll show you a few initial frames of the video that we flagged. So that's something you can turn on through HireRight now too. And yeah, we'll show you the actual image as well.
Okay. One question is this included in part of the the HireRight offer? You have to add this service to your package, your program. So please speak to either your account manager if you have one, or customer services to do that. It's not just by default included.
It should be. Hey, maybe we could talk to. We could see about making. I'm just joking. Yeah, Clive, you have to request it as much as we would like it automatically included. I do think in the future that background screening, and obviously I have a vested interest in saying this, so discount my commercial incentive to say what I'm about to say, but I think background screening, if you look in the long view, it's evolved fundamentally. I remember talking to the executives who were around the beginning of the industry in the 70s and 80s, and they were telling me stories about lugging lie detectors around and employees taking lie detector tests as part of onboarding at a new company. So you see changes in the components of a background check based on the demographic changes in the workforce. And I'll just say, like, the method and how we work. So I do think as Generation Alpha especially finds its way and makes up the majority of the workforce very soon, social media, along with identity, along with a few other check types, will increasingly become more normalized and dare I say, more important than some of the other legacy check types that are slowly coming down in certain industries.
How are highly sensitive political posts identified?
Oh, yeah. Third rail question. Always good getting one of these. So, the realm of politics, in simple terms, you're not going to see any political behavior from FAMA. I'll just show you right off the bat. These are the things you can select from. You don't see politics here. There may be other vendors out in the market that'll screen for politics, but while politics aren't a protected class in the United States, they are protected in other regions and viewed informally as protected information that employers should not be considering as part of the hiring process, despite not being listed in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, protected characteristics that can't be used in hiring. So for us, the way we think about it is like, if someone is acting really extreme, whether you're on one side of the aisle or another, left, right, brown, purple, blue, whatever color in your region is the two opposite sides of the spectrum. People who are very extreme tend to behave the same way. They tend to threaten each other. They tend to use trolling language, violent language. So if you do see anything related to politics on a report, it would only be because it includes, some of this extreme information here.
What type of interaction gets flagged? Reading, liking, posting? Does the type of interaction get flagged in the reporting?
Certainly not reading, but posting, reposting, liking, interacting with content can be. Now, that's not true for all platforms. Some platforms blind who's liking what. More recently, Twitter made a change where, or X, excuse me, made a change where they stopped publicly making likes publicly available. So you're sort of at the behest of the social media platform. If you can see it on a publicly available platform and who's liking what, typically you can get that through our solution as well. And yes, nothing found on a private profile. So no private information that we're filtering through on our side.
Okay, I mean, it looks like we've covered all the questions there, Ben, which have been fantastic. Thank you so much. We've had so many and really interesting ones as well. And hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We will be sending out a copy of the slides, the webinar, very shortly. So look out for that in the next few days. And please answer our short survey after the call, after the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.